I'm Andy Agafangelo, the founder of the Transparency Task Force. The Transparency Task Force is a certified social enterprise, and our mission is to promote ongoing reform of the financial sector so that it serves society better. That's what we do. In all honesty, we find ourselves encountering all kinds of interesting landscapes and topics and subjects. The one we're going to be focusing on tonight is, I think, of massive universal interest, because in this post-truth era in which we sadly find ourselves, deception really is everywhere. This is a major problem that society as a whole is having to wrestle with. All kinds of deceptions and non-truths from all kinds of sources. And that topic is of interest to everybody, but it's of particular interest, of course, to people who have a real need to be able to get to the truth. People such as lawyers, prosecutors, investigative journalists, campaigners, so on, so forth. We all have a need to be able to get to the truth. But how can you do that when people are so damn good at not telling the truth? That's what this is all about tonight, folks. It's all about Truth Unlocked, a very special and a very unique service that I think is going to be of great interest to you all. We are going to be hearing from Sunil Chadha and also Paul Malade. And if it wasn't for Sunil, we wouldn't even know Paul, because Sunil introduced us to Paul at Truth Unlocked. And I'll be forever grateful to Sunil for doing that. Why? Because Truth Unlocked has already helped Transparency Task Force by giving us use of its service. We've tried it, we've tested it, we like it, we really could not rate it any higher. What the service basically does is it provides a means by which deceptions or likely deceptions can be identified. And that's obviously of tremendous universal interest to everybody. Paul and his team have provided insights into the statements that have been of real interest to the Transparency Task Force. Statements from, for example, the Financial Conduct Authority, relating to a wide range of topics, including things like the Woodford scandal and things like LIBOR. It really has been remarkably interesting to learn about the work that these guys do. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, the guys at Truth Unlocked invited me to provide a testimonial, and I did without any hesitation at all. That's how impressed I am with what they do and how they go about it. And I'd also like to say that the actual people-to-people bit, dealing with these folks at Truth Unlocked, has been an absolute pleasure. They've not disappointed us once. It's fair to say that at every step of the way, they've exceeded expectations, and they've dug really deep, sometimes under massive time pressures, for actual real proper clients to find a way to help the Transparency Task Force. So Paul, Sunil, all your colleagues, I will be forever grateful for that. I really will. I really do think you're in for a treat tonight, folks. It's going to be very, very interesting stuff. Partway through the session, probably just before Paul finishes his bit, I'm probably going to be inviting you to spend 5 minutes peacefully thinking about potential use cases. I really do want you all to work with me and Paul and Sunil to think about potential use cases for Truth Unlocked, because it's a young, growing organization. And like any young, growing organization, it wants ideas about who could potentially make use of their services. So let's work with these guys and help them on their way, because they've already been remarkably helpful to us. Just before I pass over to Sunil, can I please invite everybody to show your appreciation, provide some applause for Sunil for introducing us to Truth Unlocked, for Paul and his colleagues at the firm as well. We are really, really fortunate to have kind of tripped over you via Sunil, and I'm very, very grateful for that. Folks, please do show your appreciation. You're doing some remarkably good work, and it's beautifully aligned with what the TTF mission is all about. Mr. Sunil Chadha, why don't you introduce yourself and say a few words before we then go to Paul. Thank you.
Andy, thank you very much, and welcome everybody. It's really nice to see some friendly faces, friends and people I've met before. Thank you for supporting us. I think we have something of massive interest, if I may, I am going to try and act as a bridge between you, because I knew nothing about statement analysis or linguistic techniques up until about 6 months ago when I met Paul. Anyway, I'll come on to that, but I'm going to introduce myself. I've got 37 years experience in asset management, and that's all types of asset management, from hedge funds to fund of hedge funds to traditional to private wealth, and also the service providers that sit behind them, the custodians, the depositories. I like to think I understand the market structure. So I wear many hats, and I'm going to be very clear with you as to which hat I'm wearing tonight. I'm a director of Truth Unlocked. I'm also an ambassador of the Transparency Task Force. I sit on the secretariat of an all-party parliamentary group, which is Personal Banking and Fairer Financial Services. I do those two roles for free. I don't have a problem with that at all, because I think the asymmetry has gone a little bit too far, in fact, way too far. And I should also mention I work for a highly innovative, dynamic, a subsidiary of a private financial services group. And we do the analytics for court cases, and increasingly are spotting wrongdoing in the financial services market and in other sectors of the UK economy, which is very interesting. And all I can say is everything you find in financial services is really complicated. The minute you move to other sectors, it gets less so, I think. So I'm also registered to be an expert witness at High Court. I haven't yet taken that up. But if I may, my bridging, I'm going to bridge to Paul first to try and get us to what Truth Unlocked does. So I've known Paul for probably 35 years, and I have to say we have been out and we've had some pretty hilarious times over the years. But Paul came to me quite a few months ago, 6 months ago, with something he was doing. I knew he was into psychology and other things, and he introduced me to the idea of linguistic techniques. And I use those, I hadn't realized, but I use something similar in what I do when I analyze financial services, fund documentation and other things. I try and work out what the sentence is saying and what it might not be saying, because sometimes, obviously, I need to get to the truth and the facts. So anyway, so Paul came along, showed me what he was doing. He's done some work for me, showed me quite a few examples. And I have to say, I'm an innovator. I've joined a startup because that's what we are, because I believe in it. And I think this is of massive public interest. And I think it's a game changer in any part of your life, I promise you. If I may, I'll just also, before I finish introducing Paul, I'd like to say that Paul has previous. His great-grandfather designed and built the Maya-Day automaton, which is one of the first computers to write and draw, and that was in 1800. The automaton is currently sitting in the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia, and in 2011, Martin Scorsese made a film called Hugo, and set in a French railway station, and it's about the subject's grandfather and the automaton. Anyway, it's worth having a look. It's unbelievable, to be honest with you. And I view this idea very similarly. So if I may, I'm just going to change my notes over. Introducing you to Truth Unlocked. Truth Unlocked has traditionally been the remit of law enforcement, probably driven in the US. And what we would like to do is to bring it into the public domain at this time of alternative facts, theories, ideology. Let's scrap it. Let's cut through it for yourselves. You use different tools, you work out, overlay everything, and you form your own opinion. So Truth Unlocked, we analyze verbal and written statements using a 4I approach. We've got two of probably the UK's leading linguistic techniques analysts working for us, highly experienced. I've done hundreds of cases involving wrongdoing, crime, financial services, and a lot more other things. Excuse me, my phone just went off there. And by the way, we do not use AI. Okay, we are human driven and human run. AI at the moment is not there. Content and the granularity is nowhere there, and we can't see how it can replicate a human mind very easily. When we analyze a statement, as I said, whether verbal or written, we assume from a starting point that everybody is innocent and has got nothing to hide. We do not, when our analysts look at a particular statement, we do not look at the news. We do not talk to other people who might have opinions. We don't watch documentaries. We don't do anything. It's about one thing only, and that is the statement. Everything else is pollution and noise. So my experience of using Truth Unlocked services before I joined, I found that it opened doors that I couldn't see. If you imagine yourself in a white room, you can see maybe a door or two. You use Truth Unlocked and maybe you get another door or two. Behind one door might be nothing. Behind another door might be something that either on its own points to something, or given all the other data sources and documentation you have, might correlate. And if it correlates, you probably can place more weight on that particular line of investigation than anything else. It's a new tool. It's brand new, we think, to the UK in financial services and law. It's a new tool for your toolbox, and that's the way I'd look at it. So if I may, our credentials, I'll start with probably the most important. On a monthly basis and for quite a while, we train US government agencies, and that includes, outside of the agencies, psychologists, crime scene investigators, the FBI, US Homeland Security, and US military intelligence. And we train their analysts on what to look for on given statements. So we are currently working on, or have just finished working on, it's a Netflix cold case, Sophie, a murder in West Cork. We provided a report to the family, to Sophie's family in Paris, who've met their lawyer, and we understand there is a report on its way to the Irish Director of Public Prosecutions. Secondly, and this is an unbelievable one, our team have been appointed to the 1970s serial killer case, the BTK, which I believe is blind, throttle, kill. That's the way he used to kill his victims. He's in jail for 10, and they've reopened the case, very high profile in the United States, because they think he's probably committed another 5 murders that he's not been subject to justice for. As Andy said, we have had a look at the current Woodford Link compensation package. Our client is the Transparency Task Force, and we can't comment on that simply because our analysis has gone to them to overlay with everything else they have, and they will decide strategy and usefulness, etc., etc. Finally, Paul and our team comment on these types of CSI, crime scene investigation, and other types of crime blogs. And Paul regularly gets 10, 15,000 hits. So primarily in the US, but his opinion is sought after and respected, as are the rest of the analysts on our team. Going forwards, what we'd like to do is to, certainly in financial services, move this into research, investment research, equity research, company research. You can see the government has rolled back on the latest FRC, Financial Reporting Council, updates to regulation. We think that's very important. And having analysed a number of earnings statements and calls, we can see things, precursors, pointers to problems behind the scenes. And I think we're going to cover one of those examples today. Also of interest, and I think this benefits everybody, insurance companies. That's a target for us because there are many people making rather extraordinary claims on their insurance policies. And obviously analysing statements, whether verbal or written, gives a line of inquiry to the insurance company. And of course, that's in all of our interest, because if we keep the fraud down, our policies, the policy costs stay down. All right. So that's kind of where we're going. Our website, www.truth-unlock.com, it is up. We have a homepage, but we have been, things have got so busy that we have just not had time to update it properly. So we do have a redesign going on. And you will see a new website very soon, and it should have all of the case studies, blogs that we're blogging on, including current murder inquiries in the US and elsewhere, and you can see exactly where we're coming from and how we do it. If I may, and very finally, closing remarks, and certainly for firms, financial services and elsewhere, directors, managers, management in general are looking for an edge, right? Something to give them. It's that extra door that appears in the white room, all right? It might lead somewhere, it might not, but it's about the edge. You can analyze where you are as a company, and you can also probably analyze some of your competitors. In terms of services, we obviously analyze using linguistic techniques. We analyze written and verbal statements, whether it's court or not. It doesn't matter. It could be a public announcement. We provide training, basic training, and you'll see some of this in just a second with Paul, and also specific tailored training. And I have to say, we really appreciate your help. I think after this, you'll see where we're going. We're a startup, and obviously we're disruptive, and we really, really welcome your support. And our opinions, analysis, etc., will be totally objective. And for some clients, that might be that we don't find anything, and we will come out and say that. We won't be pressurized into following what a particular client wants. We will just say, going on that statement and that statement alone, the statement they've given us. And that is the key to it. Please feel free to have a good old chuckle at some of these examples, because you will have seen and heard of them before. Bill Clinton is there, and a few others. Even a short sentence, just have a look at how many things might be wrong with it, and what questions you might want to ask afterwards. So what we do generally is we will analyze the statement, and depending on obviously severity and the client and what they want to do, we can come up with pointed, framed questions that point at the sensitivities in the statement. And we will keep on going. If we get a response that is inaccurate, we can review it, and we will keep on going, and we will repoint the question. And eventually we'll either get an answer, or from the subject concerned, they will stop answering. Either way, you get a good view in your head as to what we're doing, how this fits, and how you should have this in your portfolio in terms of just a view. It's another view to overlay and to look at things through. Finally, any questions, please, at the end. We'll be happy to take them. And now I'd like to hand over to my good friend and colleague, Paul Meyerday.
Thank you, Sunil. I really appreciate it. And thank you also to Andy and all of the TTF team for putting this together today. Can't thank you enough. And thanks for joining everyone and coming along today. I hope we're going to give you some really useful takeaways today on linguistic analysis and what we do. We're only going to be scratching the surface today, but hopefully it's going to be useful for your business, maybe possibly looking at some competitors in terms of their language perhaps, and also for your personal, in your personal life as well, just in terms of being able to look at the truth. Is the plumber going to be turning up, or things like that? So I'm just going to share my screen now. bear with me. Okay. Can everyone see the full screen now and hear me okay?
Perfectly well. Thanks, Paul. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay. So our language comes from our childhood experiences, our life experiences, the job that we do, our relationships, and even during our day, what happens in a day can shape the language that we use, whether it's by email or whatever the case may be. If we're talking to someone, if we're making a statement, or if it's something that becomes more serious, like an interview or a criminal statement. All of these things feature and become more prevalent in our language. I'm just going to give you we're going to give you some examples over the next half an hour using real life case examples from real life cases that we've looked at. So many people don't realize that liars rarely lie, which it seems a bit odd. 10% or less of the time will someone say a direct lie. Other deception, people look to deceive us, whether it's in our business or our personal life. The deception is 90% upwards by omission. In other words, they're not going to tell us what they really meant, what's really going on. So if they don't lie and they don't say anything, then how can we tell they're lying? That's what we're going to look at today. So just because you can't see something, it doesn't mean it's not there. And this chap, Willard Wigan, if you get a chance to look him up, he does these incredible miniature artwork under a microscope. It's just absolutely incredible. It's just within the eye of a needle there. So just because you can't see something, it doesn't mean it's not there. So we're just going to go through an example here. It's a case you might be familiar with. This was Shannon Matthews, who went missing a few years back. And Karen Matthews, her mother, called out in the media, and this is her emergency call. And we're just going to touch on this to give you a flavour of when someone doesn't say something. So the operator says, "When did you last see her?" And Karen Matthews says she went to school this morning. So on the face of this looks like a perfectly normal response. She went to school this morning. But if we analyze this properly, one of the things that deceptive people will do is they will want us in our minds to start to bridge the difference, to actually to fill in the blanks. What she doesn't do here is she doesn't answer the operator's question. She doesn't say when she last saw her. The fact that Shannon went to school that morning may or may not have been truthful, but it's not when she last saw her. She could have been in bed. She may not have seen her go to school. We analysed this call, but I'm just going to go through some details of what wasn't covered in there. As you saw, she didn't answer the question there. But within the call, she didn't use any personal pronouns. She didn't use I for herself. She didn't use she for Shannon. Also, within the call, there is no sensory language. As you saw, she didn't say when she last saw her. What we find in reliable accounts is we will see more sensory language, things like smell, sight, and auditory. During the call, she also didn't use Shannon's name at all. There was no urgency in her language. She didn't call for help, and she didn't express any concern for Shannon's immediate danger. Now, Shannon was thankfully later found alive, but she was being harboured by her uncle, you might remember. but it was suspected that Karen wanted money from donations like the McCanns, and that's how this came about. It's just one example there. So what's the purpose of an emergency call? Firstly, to get help. Secondly, to say what help is needed. And thirdly, where the help is needed. That's location, and it may be for the victim themselves, you know, what's wrong with them, where's the location of that help. Now, these things may seem really obvious within what we're saying here, but actually within deceptive statements, within deceptive emergency calls, what we find is elements of these are missing, omitted, or skewed. Okay, and we're just going to go through some examples here. Now, an emergency call for us is the first interview. Whenever we can get hold of these in the case, it's always our first thing. Before someone is actually interviewed, you know, if they are suspected, then the emergency call can allow us to determine whether the person calling had anything to do with it or whether they didn't. We could go through this case here. So the emergency operator says, what's the problem today? So Shannon Price says, I just found I had my husband go make me some food downstairs. He got home, he just got home. I heard this big bang. I went downstairs, blood everywhere. I don't know if he's okay. I'm not down there right now because I have seizures. If I get stressed out, I'm going to seize. Now let's get into this and just analyze this short passage here. So going back to what we were saying, does she say here at any point that does she call out for help at any point here? No, she doesn't. Secondly, does she tell us what help is needed? No, she doesn't. In fact, she says she doesn't want to go downstairs. I'm not down there right now and I have seizures. In fact, if you were to listen to this, you might actually think the help was needed for her rather than her husband who's downstairs and there's blood everywhere. And thirdly, where the help is needed. Has she said the location, given her address? Has she said what's up with the husband? No, she hasn't. So it's just this is an example of a typical call that we might look at. Interestingly, just in here we have the word just. We did some research into emergency calls, just over 150 to date. And what we found is the word just, if it's used in the first sentence, is indicative that the person calling is responsible for the crime. We've looked over 150 to date, and every one of the people have been responsible that have used the word just in that first sentence. And there are a lot more reasons around that, but we'll cover that another time. And this call was actually, some of you might remember the actor Gary Coleman. It was his wife who made the call. Gary Coleman was a famous child actor in a series called Different Strokes. His parents spent all of his money, unfortunately, that he made doing that. And unfortunately, following this call and what happened to him, he later died. So what's the purpose of a statement? Whether it's a statement on financials, legal statement, a murder statement, what is the purpose of a statement? It's to tell us who they are, tell us what they know and remember, and tell us what they did. Now, again, these things may seem really obvious, but please bear that. But often with deceptive statements, these things, as I mentioned before, get skewed or omitted. Let's take an example here. This is corporate theft. I'm not the kind of person who would normally steal or spend company money. I do not remember how much I may have taken, but it was not more than £3,000. I did not borrow it more than one time. So let's go into this statement here. So did we ask them to tell us what kind of person that they weren't? No, we didn't. Did we ask them what they didn't remember? No, we didn't. And did we ask them to tell us what they didn't do? No, we didn't either. So we've got these three things that come through within the statement there. We didn't ask, and interestingly, they bring up, I did not borrow it more than one time. And they weren't asked about whether they had borrowed it more than one time. They introduce it here. And what that tells us is they did borrow or take money more than one time. Interestingly as well, whenever you're looking at statements, no matter what they are, in terms of any investigations, people that are being deceptive or responsible will often seek to minimize the crime that they're being that they're suspected of doing. So what we see here is we see graduation. First they start with the word still, then they move to the word taken, then they move to borrow. They're minimizing the allegation that that's been made against them. Interestingly as well, a lot of people, if you're ever interviewing people or getting a statement, it's better to use what did you take? What did you take rather than what you steal? Many people who are accused of theft will often think that they're not stealing. Maybe they didn't get their pay rise, maybe someone got promoted ahead of them. So when they take money, they often don't, they feel that they are owed the money. Apologies there. And there's they also introduce would normally steal. And we're just going to come to that here. This is a different case where a wife went missing. The husband's statement, he says, I decided to go for a run, which I normally do. I usually go to the lake that is very close to us. And, excuse me, sorry, I'm just moving something out of the way there. This is what we call the normal factor. So if you have ever told your kids a fairy tale story, you would normally start off saying something like, it was a day like any other day, and the daughter and the son will sit up because they know what's coming next is going to be anything else but a normal day, and they're looking forward to the story. And the normal factor that comes in within statements is very, very similar. If you have a statement that comes through where someone tells you what they normally did or they usually did, then it is very highly likely that what they are referring through to, whether it's the day or a particular thing within that day that they're referring through to, it's highly likely that that's going to, that was anything else but a normal day. In this case here, what we have firstly is the word decided. He says, I decided to go for a run. Now, decided is an intention, but not an action. So if you ever see words that like decided in a statement, whether it's whatever the crime may be, then it's always worth questioning and going back and finding out whether that action took place or not. So he said he decided to go for a run, which he normally does. I usually go to the lake. So what we have here is a combination of both normally and usually here. And where we get words that are the same words or similar words are repeated, it often signals that it's sensitive to the person. Here what we have is he's saying what he normally and usually did on that particular day. Now, he did actually decide to go for a run that day. And this was a professor who then had an argument with his wife, and he killed her. And in his statement, he told us what he normally and usually did. So it's just interesting to see, if you analyze things and you're looking out for these things, you can pick them up. Let's go on to a different example. So what's a reliable denial? A reliable denial has three components within it. Firstly, the use of I. This is where someone takes personal possession of the denial. Secondly, didn't, they say didn't or did not, and then the precise allegation. So just for example here, I didn't transfer the money from the client account. That's a reliable denial on its form. I didn't, and then the allegation in full. Here's an example, a different example. What we see here is the I, the personal commitment, disappears just at the start. It says, didn't transfer the money from the client account. And what that is, it's an unreliable denial. It doesn't mean that it didn't happen, but it's one that we go back and question. It doesn't have the commitment of the personal pronoun I. Another one is, I never transferred the money from the client's account. The word never is not as reliable as didn't. And finally, as an example, I would never transfer the money from the client's account. If he's been interviewed, if the person's being interviewed, having been suspected of transferring the money from the client's account, it's very unusual, that very unlikely that they would never do it again. So would never is future conditional, and it's not a reliable denial. Let's take another example here, the power of pronouns. So pronouns, I, we, he, she, they, us, all pronouns. And we've been using these even pre-speech in some cases. Pronouns are 100% reliable, especially the pronoun I. We've been using it even as young children. We've used it hundreds and thousands of times. So where I is present, it provides commitment, and where it isn't there, it has reduced commitment, or it's possible that the action they're talking about did not happen. Let's use this example here. Hunter Biden, this was quite a recent one, and this is his comment. I've absolutely no comment. I couldn't care less. I haven't looked at it. They must have hacked my phone. Anything that is a revealing picture is between Mindy and me. I really don't want to start my day off this way. Definitely didn't post it anywhere. Okay, so let's look at this. So firstly, at first glance, this looks very good. We've got the pronoun I's here showing commitment within the statement that he's making, except for the important part, which is the part where he says about posting the pictures. The personal pronoun I is the only time where the I is missing. So he posted the photos. Distancing language in linguistic analysis can be very, very useful as well. You might remember the Bill Clinton example here, the Monica Lewinsky affair within the White House. Bill Clinton allegedly was having a sexual relationship of some sort with Monica Lewinsky. And this is what he said. I did not have sexual relationships with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. This sentence, a single sentence, sometimes even one word, could be absolutely loaded. And in this sentence, it is, and this is a great example. So in terms of distancing language, I just want to give you an example on this one, just go through it. So what we find first is that the I and the Miss Lewinsky couldn't be further apart in distance within the sentence and what he's saying. Then we have the word with. Now, with, especially within criminal statements or, you know, statements of this type, with can suggest distancing again within the language. So we've got that element as well. Then additionally, what we've got is the word that woman. If you have statements where someone says this or that relating to something, this we keep close to us. That is something we want to push away from us. So what we got is I and Mr. Lewinsky far away in the sentence, the distance in language of with, and the word that as well within the sentence. He doesn't want to be associated with Monica Lewinsky here. Interestingly as well, he uses the word woman. The sentence could stand alone stand on its own. He could have said, I did not have sexual relations with Ms. Lewinsky. Why does he add the word woman? We subsequently found out that one of the things that was being cited against him was that Monica Lewinsky was young. And at the time she was 22 and he was 49. He's included the word woman to actually help his case because of the allegations that were being leveled against him. And very interestingly as well, he uses the word sexual relations. In terms of sexual relations, it's a very specific word that he's used. And the reason he used that is because he didn't believe what was going on, which wasn't sexual intercourse. Obviously, you may know what went on, and I won't say it, you know, right now. If not, perhaps look it up afterwards. But sexual relations is the definition which is personal and subjective to him in his experiences or the experience he wanted to convey. And if he would have been wired up to a polygraph, it's highly likely he would have passed the polygraph. If they would have said to him, did you have sexual relations? Did you have sexual relations or not with Mr. Lewinsky? If he would have said, I did not have sexual relations with Ms. Lewinsky, he would likely have passed on that one because it's his personal subjective relation, his personal subjective terminology that he's using on that one. If that makes sense. As Sunil mentioned, we also look at annual reports, earnings calls, and this one is something we looked at not as part of work, but just out of interest. It was very, very interesting. When we introduce people, the manner in which we do the social introduction tells us about the quality of the relationship that we have with that person. Okay, so if I was to introduce, for example, my wife Lorraine, you know that I've introduced my wife Lorraine. That is indicative of a healthy relationship. If I would have just said, this is Lorraine, you wouldn't know if I was married or not. Interestingly, what we find within criminal statements, especially within murders, is that the person responsible, let's say, for example, it was a husband who murdered the wife, often we find the social introductions are diminished. We've actually had statements where the person has not said either their name or their relationship. So so even though a criminal file may say they're married, if they don't bring it into the statement, then we cannot say that they are married, and they're not married at the point that they are recounting the statement. And when we go into a statement, what that means is at the point that they're giving that statement, they are not married to that person. They are still, when they're going back into their experiential memory and they are reliving it, they may have the anger, and then maybe that they can't bring themselves to use the word wife or to bring themselves to use the person's name. So the quality of the social introduction tells us about the quality of the relationship, not in general, but at the point that they're recounting the statement. This one here was quite an interesting one, in that usually we'd expect the introduction to go from longer to shorter. My wife Lorraine to Lorraine, after I've said that. So what we've got here, Laurie, this is a statement from Laurie McKelwey, who was CFO at the time, about Philip Clark, who was the CEO of Tesco's at that time, and they were going through their annual statement. So at the start, Laurie introduces Philip Clark as Phil, very cordial, very light, and we'd expect that to continue. Later, he introduces, he later starts using the word Philip, less formal, and the change was unexpected. And towards the end of the statement, it moved to Philip Clark, which is, again, it's an inverse relationship of what we would have expected. And what happened in this particular example is that after this statement, Laurie McKelwey resigned, citing that he couldn't work with Philip Clark anymore. There was dysfunctional in terms of their relationship and within the board, and the Tesco profits as a result within that year reflected that dysfunctional relationship. There was a profits hit, that one. So just for something very, very minor within that annual report, and something that seems so insignificant was actually so powerful. So, excuse me for a moment. So now I'd like to just cover what is in our mind comes out in our language. Don't know whether you've ever played Kaplunk or played it with the kids or in the past, but the idea is to pull out the straws without the marbles falling out. What I'd like you to do is to put yourself in the mind of a murderer or a criminal, or anyone that's giving a statement, whether it's under an interview or whether it's something they're writing down or they're emailing through, and they want, or someone simply, just telling perhaps a white lie at work or whatever within an email, whatever the case may be. I'd like you to think of the marbles that are in the basket. And all those marbles are the deceptive elements. They may be what actually happened. It might be the elements of the murder that they know that you don't. And as they're talking, as they're writing, they're pulling out the straws, and they're hoping they're not going to let any of those marbles drop. That they're not going to let any elements of deception out. Unfortunately, due to the speed of transmission from our brain to when we're talking, to when we're writing, whatever the case may be, it's impossible for those marbles not to fall out linguistically. And these are the elements we catch. Although we're only touching on a few tonight, there are hundreds of different elements that we look out for, that we can find out to discern whether someone is deceptive or not. But the people that are talking or writing that are deceptive, they're praying those marbles aren't going to fall out. Just going to run through some examples here. So this is a case of a missing daughter. Now, what happened is the stepfather here had come under some, the mother of the daughter had been calling out to the media, and she'd actually said that the stepfather hadn't been doing enough to help. So the stepfather, a week later, she was still missing, went to the media, and amongst his statement, this is what he said. Contrary to rumours floating around out there, I am helping. Seems like a perfectly normal statement. One of the words that is additional here is this, the word floating. Now, this particular chap was a truck driver. His language should be grounded. Whilst it's in context, it's something we highlight and we will reflect back within analysis amongst other bits and pieces within a general statement, and we'll reflect back and just, and that we'll have within a report. In this particular case, unfortunately, the daughter was found in the nearby lake, and he was responsible for her murder. And basically, just like we were using the example just back there, the marbles falling, whilst he was making that statement, he had it in his mind. He's thinking of things he shouldn't, that he doesn't want to let go, but it comes out in the language. Here's another example. Operator, what's the emergency? Caller, he woke up in a cough and started like choking out. The caller choked the victim. These may seem obvious, but these are all overlooked unless you're looking for them linguistically. People people don't see them and don't highlight them. Here's another example. Okay, will you try CPR? I'll take a stab at it. Here's another example. There's a case of missing wife and children, 2 children, and his wife was pregnant at the time as well. Here's what the quote from the husband. Last night, I wanted that knock on the door. I wanted to see those kids run in and just barrel rush me and knock me on the ground. He could have used any language, he could have used any examples, any terminology. He used the word barrel. And unfortunately, his wife and his children were found in the oil barrels that highlighted here. He was having an affair with another woman, and unfortunately, he murdered his whole family in that particular instance. So just because you can't see something, it doesn't mean it's not there. So what you say tells us what you see tells us what you think, and what you think tells us who you are. Hopefully today we've given you some useful tips to help you hear with precision, read with precision, and see things more precisely. Thank you all so much for your time today. Really appreciate everything Andy and all the team at TTF have done today, and for you all for coming and listening, and just like to see whether you had any questions. Thank you all.
Well, thank you, Paul and Sonny. I think everybody's going to want to join me in showing our appreciation, first of all, for what you do and what you've shared today. Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure everybody found that interesting. Personally, I find it fascinating, especially when we go on to talk about, in quite generic terms, the ways in which your work has been of benefit to the work of the Transparency Task Force. Paul, are you going to be okay for us to circulate the slides? It's got all your contact details there and so on. Would it be okay for you to do that?
Absolutely, yeah, no problems. Yeah, no problems.
Thank you very, very much indeed. I want people to understand why the work that you do is of enormous interest to the Transparency Task Force. And folks, I'm not going to talk about anything specific, okay? There's good reason for that. But I am going to talk to you about the kind of things that Paul and his team can do that we have found really, really interesting. Really interesting. You all know the kind of work that the Transparency Task Force does. You all know the kind of challenges and frustrations we have when a party is presenting us with information in a particular way, and there's something about it that doesn't quite feel right. There's something about it that doesn't quite tie up with our worldview. In plain English, we think there might be some BS within that narrative that the other party is giving us. We think they might be trying to use weasel wording. I like that phrase, using weasel wording to articulate a particular narrative that's not the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And what we've been able to do is to share with Paul and his team copies of, let's say, correspondence or copies of statements. And we've been able to say to them, have a look at this and tell us what you think. And I think on 4 occasions now, they have analysed stuff like that. And before I go any further, I want to really emphasise something that Sunil touched on when Sunil was talking. You might remember, for those of you who were here close to the beginning, you might remember how Sunil said something like, they just want to look at the statements, right? Paul and his colleagues have stopped me and Mark Bishop I'm talking about here, giving our kind of verdict on what we think is going on. They basically say, whoa, don't tell us anything else. Don't tell us anything else. I just want to analyse the statement. Because if you tell us more, there's a chance that your thoughts get in our heads. And then how can we know that what we come back to you with is reliable, objective, evidence-based, scientifically sound, robust? And we were really impressed by that to begin with. And then, I'm sure Paul knows which case I'm talking about here. We invited Paul and his team to study the transcript of a hearing in a session in Parliament. And boy, oh boy, we knew that those guys knew nothing about the context or the situation or the dynamics, right? But they were able to really forensically home in on some things that didn't quite sit right, some interesting choice of words and sentences and phrasing. And I tell you what it felt like as somebody kind of observing them doing their work and reading the reports that they write and that kind of thing. It's kind of as if these guys have got like a pair of night vision glasses. That's the best way I could describe it. The rest of us are kind of scrabbling around in the dark trying to see what the hell's going on. But these guys, because of their skill set and their training and their capability, it's like they put on a pair of night vision glasses and they can see the stuff that we can't see. And I really look forward to when we are able to more publicly share with you some specifics about the work they've done. But I really do hope, everybody, that you've had a chance to understand the work that Truth Unlocked does, the logic behind it, the science behind it, the experience behind it, and the highly credible approach. I'm going to go to Mr. Mark Bishop. Mark and I have been equally impressed with Paul and his colleagues and Sunil and everyone since day one. I'm sure you'll support what I'm about to say, Mark, first of all. Not only have the guys' product been great, but the way that they've interacted with us has been just like off the scale, polite and sensible and courteous and frankly friendly. It's been wonderful. Mark, what would you like to say? Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I mean, the first thing I'd like to do is to endorse everything you've said. I've seen what the guys at Truth Unlocked have done, and it really is remarkable. The extent to which these kind of little verbal ticks, if you like, indicate when somebody wants to distance themselves from a statement, when a statement isn't the full truth. and they sometimes even give you a bit of an indication of what the actual truth might be. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, agree very much with you about the way that we've been working with the team, which is very constructive. I do also want to kind of put in a little bit of a note of caution to kind of manage people's expectations, which is that these guys have to earn a living. It's a business for them, so we wouldn't want 30 people from this call to email Truth Unlocked saying, here's a statement, can you tell me why is this lying bastard lying? Because it's not their job to do that work for you on an unpaid basis. The purpose of this tool is really to be used as part of an investigation by a properly appointed authority. So, for example, if you invested in a collective investment scheme that has turned out to be fraudulent, and we know there are many of those, think of introducing the insolvency practitioners who've been appointed to Truth Unlocked. The insolvency practitioners have got a budget to use to investigate, and it is their statutory duty, court-appointed duty, to investigate. So if a tool is made available to them that would help, there is every probability that they will use it. Similarly, if you're talking with the police about a matter where you believe there has been some criminality, they have a budget to investigate, and this would be a very valuable tool. So you might want to think about introducing them. Those are a couple of examples. I can think there are more. I'm sure that others within this call can think of more, but that's really the aim of the exercise. Similarly, probably another one to mention is litigation. If you're involved in litigation, you've appointed lawyers to act for you, there is a budget for them to do their job, then they may consider using this tool. You may wish to introduce them to Paul and Chris and Sunil, but it's not a thing where we can just email them and say, what do you think of this? Because that, I think, would be unreasonable. So there we are. That's really all I wanted to say, but I think it's fantastic, and I hope we can work with the team in a very productive way.
Mark, thank you very, very much indeed. I think Richard Lotson's got a question. If you can keep it nice and succinct for me, Richard, that would be really, really good. And then we'll go to everyone else that wants to come in with any comments or questions. Richard Loxon, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, right. Well, the question is quite simple, is that first of all, I put all my questions into the chat. So anybody who wants to contact me, that's fine. I'm just saying that I totally endorse everything that's been said. I also say that I understand why I was sent an emergency message saying I mustn't send emails or what have you. I completely understand all that. And what I'm just saying is that I believe I have information that would be suitable to Truth Unlocked. So this is going beyond a question to a statement. To use the thing is that I first got involved in this kind of thing back in the 1990s when the first reason why voice recognition software was included or was introduced is because men couldn't use keyboards. So, but there's also voice recognition software was used so that when people made a phone call and saying, I'm making a claim to an insurance company, they were asked to say, what is your name and address? That was a calibration question. The person already knew that the receiver of the call knew what the name and address for the person was, because even back in the 1990s, computer systems were powerful enough to say, okay, this person, this address, we know their address. So the reason that the person was asked to give their name and address was purely for calibration. And that's what I need to say, I think, at the moment.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. Lovely stuff. Let's invite others to come up with any comments or questions, any observations, or indeed ideas. Let's do that. So please raise your hand digitally or otherwise, wave something at me if you want to come in with a comment or a question. Anybody like to react to what they've been hearing tonight? Deborah Clark, lovely to have you again, Deborah. Please do take yourself off mute and share your thought. Thank you.
Can I just ask how the whole woke pronouns, all this kind of thing, does that affect your work? Because that seems to be quite complicated anyway.
Interesting question, Deborah. Paul, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is a very good question. The woke side of things does introduce another layer, as it were, Deborah, but ultimately the going back to childhood, the personal pronouns that come from childhood will be predominant. So it presents another layer, but it doesn't stop us doing what we do, identifying those layers.
Thank you very much indeed.
Well,
thanks
I'm
for that.
sorry, Andy. Could I just add a little bit to that as well? I've had an experience with a challenger bank, and I joined for diversity and inclusion. And when I had a look at the website, this is after joining, I did immense due diligence, something I was proud of. And when I looked at the website later on, I found out that it didn't look like diversity and inclusion to me. And when I wrote to them, I got a set of facts back for them that were incorrect. So I will be moving bank. There's a lot of things going on in there, but I expect my bank to be honest with me in terms of their policies and in terms of the reasons for doing what they do. And they didn't add up. The website didn't add up with the claims and the facts, the actions. So yes, so there you go. I bank with a kiddie bank, I'm afraid, and I have to move because I don't think they will see the risks coming down the line with my money, and I can't accept that.
Well, interesting stuff. Thank you, Sam. Thank you. Would anybody else like to come with a comment or a question? Wave something at me if you do. I'm going to invite Juan Carlos Venegas to tell us a little bit about himself and the work that he does. I'll be particularly interested, Juan, in your thoughts about what you've heard today and the extent to which what Paul and co have explained could be in some way relevant to your work. I'm not looking for anything specific, Juan. Just tell everybody a bit about the work that you do. Thank you. And then we'll go to Robert Dillon. Thanks, Juan.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I'm a forensic accountant working on financial crime, and specifically as well in fraud detection, fraud investigation, and fraud prevention. I was going to raise my hand before Andy mentioned my name because I wanted to bring a question as well because of the connection of the presentation and when we conduct forensic interview witnesses. One of the things caught my attention because of the relationship, in this case is written language, in our case is spoken language, and we have to detect deceptive behavior during an interview. And it was very interesting to find the similarity, especially with expressions like, the adjective that, or referring to a person as that person, which is an indication that the individual trying to detach from that other individual. In this case, it is a connection of a potential crime, for example. And there are many examples like that, which is, have come up in the presentation that I can relate to. And I have a question, as I mentioned, in terms of how this application is perceived from the point of view of the legal profession and the court, considering that lawyers tend to be very, how to say, either picky or very peculiar when trying to address things that could be put under a subjective perspective. So the interpretation of made from the sentence, then they can say, well, that could be subjective. So my question, just to make it clear, is how valid, and then if you face any challenges on this application from the legal perspective.
Lovely.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a good question. So, in terms of the linguistic analysis, as it stands at the moment, it is admissible in court in Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden. It's accepted as evidence. Like the polygraph, it's not accepted currently in the UK and the US, but it is used as an investigative aid. So in terms of, what we're able to do is we're able to produce a report and identify and frame questions that can then be used as part and parcel of perhaps a financial investigation, a murder investigation. So, for instance, we were working on a case just last week on a murder investigation, and we were able to frame particular questions that the investigators were then able to be go back and use, and we were able to identify a particular point in the day based on the way that we can look at the statements of the interview. So it was a recorded interview that we then got transcribed. We were able to identify that they were withholding information. We framed the questions for the interview for the interviewers to go back with, and also directed them to a particular point in the day that was particularly sensitive within their language, and told them to go back and keep asking questions about that point of the day. So that's really, I don't know if that answers the question, but it sort of gives a flavour of what we're able to do. It's not necessarily, although we're able to identify whether someone is guilty or has guilty knowledge, or maybe innocent, we're able to but we can also work out usually the time something happened, and sometimes, as you saw from some of the examples there, how it may have happened, and where perhaps in a murder investigation where the body may be. So all of those different elements come together.
Well, could I add something to that, please? And I mean, when I first used linguistic techniques through Paul, I was working on a project and I was at a crossroads. I had a number of routes to go down. Paul analysed the statement for me, and all of a sudden there were some correlations, and I could prioritise which roads to look at or which roads to go down. And that's the part of the overlay where you might combine linguistic techniques and the findings with other sources of knowledge that you might have gathered for yourself. And obviously that is very particular, it's personal, but that's how it's helped me. And I probably would say I've saved a couple of months in investigative analysis. That's what I've saved. So that's the way I look at it.
Thank you very much indeed. This is all really, really valuable stuff. Mr. Robert Downmer. Robert, lovely to see you. It's been a while, sir. Please introduce yourself and make your point. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And Juan Carlos actually did ask the same question I was going to, but however, I think it would be interesting to hear maybe a little bit about sort of more preemptive work that you might be using this technology with. I mean, I'm also quite familiar with both psychology and linguistics. Worked to some extent also particularly on institutional organizational culture. So apart from sort of the post-event situations you've mentioned, in a preemptive work, and you have on your background there, human resources, do you have any sort of good examples where organizations would be using this to help them to understand their own culture and work more what I would call tactically, strategically, in a positive way with organizational culture, and where this can sort of spill out in various forms within an organization, of course, is the AGM and other statements that they make. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think probably one of the values is in potential training in being able to identify certain linguistic markers. So, for example, you mentioned HR, the ability to be able to ask questions and be able, if it was perhaps sexual allegations, maybe a he said, she said type of situation, being able to have that analysed, and also having some tools in, having that toolkit as well to be able to look for typical markers would be useful in that type of scenario. Don't know if that answers the question, but hopefully a little flavour there.
Thank you. Are you finding, Paul, that as you carry on your work, you're finding more and more potential use cases for it? I mean, presumably, you've kind of developed the service and you're keen to take it to market in different applications. Are you finding your list of potential applications for what you do is growing all the time?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, predominantly we've worked within the, unfortunately, murder cases has been a big thing. Also the financial side of things that we've been doing as well. But really, these applications, you know, even in everyday life, you know, I mentioned earlier about, you know, being able to see if the plumber is going to arrive. And recently had a plumber called in for an emergency, and he didn't use he didn't say I'll be with you later. So we'll be with you later, and it was a reduced commitment. And you know, we don't rely on we just note those things. As it turned out, that plumber didn't turn up, but I'd already looked up another plumber ready to come. But just to go back in terms of the commercial perspectives, the applications are limitless. It can be insurance, it can be insolvency. They apply in everyday life and in every aspect of life.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And in terms of Transparency Task Force, again, we're not going to go into any specifics because that wouldn't really be appropriate, but you've done a great deal of work studying and writing reports where we've suspected the other party has not been giving us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I know we've made this point numerous times. It's been very impressive for you having done that. Let's talk about politicians, okay? So typically on a Sunday, between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock, I find myself shouting at the telly at least half a dozen times. I love watching Laura Kuenssberg, or before that was Andrew Marr. And what you find yourself doing, what I find myself doing, is getting progressively more agitated, where the journalist is asking the politician the question, and the politician is behaving as if they're specially trained to kind of deceive and deflect. Do people, this might be quite a naive question, Paul, do people literally get trained on how to give deceptive answers in response to, for example, questions from journalists or questions from people who might be accusing them? Is that, if you like, a mirror image of your work? Your work's all about turning the obfuscation and the BS into the truth. Are people trained to turn the truth into obfuscation and BS in response to journalist questions and that kind of thing?
I think there is a certain amount of media training, as it were, and in terms of that. I think one of the obvious ones that comes through is they won't always answer the question, and that's probably the most dominant one that comes through. That people who want to deceive will often try and shift the conversation away. You'll see that you can see that not just with politicians, but in deceptive statements and interviews. They want to shift the conversation away, or not talk about the particular thing, or those sorts of things. So,
thank you. And I'm going to take the conversation somewhere that's going to be of interest, I hope, to a few people on this conversation. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to talk to you all about this. So this is the web page, the gov.uk web page for something called the 7 Principles of Public Life. And I know there are quite a few people in this meeting today who are here as attendees who will be very interested to know about the 7 Principles of Public Life if they don't know about them already. So this relates to people in public office. I believe there are some exceptions. I'm never too sure whether the Financial Conduct Authority is or isn't one of the bodies covered by the 7 Principles of Public Life. But they are as follows: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. And this one here, honesty, is clearly relevant to the conversation we're having this evening with Paul and Co. I would say, and this is me as speaking as an individual, there have been numerous, dozens and dozens of interactions with one or more public bodies where it has been clear to me and others that they really haven't been telling the truth, and they haven't been honest. They've either been lying, or more likely, they haven't been giving the full story. They've been doing that thing where they weasel word around stuff. They don't answer the question you actually asked. They ask a variation of that question as if they didn't understand the question, as if it's just an innocent exercise. And Paul, I'll tell you where this gets really annoying. I'm speaking very frankly with you now. Where this gets really annoying is where people have submitted complaints, right? Because what tends to happen, and you might have some comments on this, you may or may not, they'll submit a complaint to some public body or another, or some entity or another, and the body responding to that complaint will reframe the complaint that's been made and respond to not the complaint you made, but something slightly different. And it's so sneaky. And unless you really concentrate and think about it and study what they're actually saying to you, you can end up falling into the trap that they're being, innocently responding to what you have to say. It's a real problem. I'd love to know if there are any ways or techniques to try to identify when organizations are using manipulative, deceptive language to try to fool you into believing what they're saying, even though they may not be sharing the truth. Any further comments on that? And does anybody in the audience have any experience of the kind of thing I've been talking about? We'll go to Paul for his initial comments, then Richard, I can see you waving your hand. I'll get you in a second. Maybe Nigel Cairns would have a comment or two on this as well. Paul, any comments in relation to that, the way organisations can sometimes adapt the message you give them to suit their agenda, so that, for example, their response isn't to your complaint, it's some variation of your complaint, but in some way lets them off the hook. And then we'll go to Richard. Then I'd love to hear from Nigel Cairns. I know he's had a lot of experience of these sorts of things. Paul, thank you.
Yeah, I think probably the simplest way is that often people and organizations will try and get you to fill in, your mind will automatically try and fill in what they are saying but not saying. And the art is being able to catch what they're really saying. That's probably to try and distill that, if that made sense.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I add something there, Andy, please? I think with these types of institutions that make a habit of doing this, there's a poor culture.
Yeah.
And I think the Transparency Task Force can probably work out from experience and these types of responses to complaints where they are going to have trouble in getting proper answers, And obviously, in a way, that's where we come in. And if you know the institution is culturally poor, you would be doubly careful and you would read those responses very carefully.
Thank you very much indeed, Samuel. Thank you. Mr. Richard Loxton, as brief as you can, then we're going to go to Nigel Keynes for his comments. And then if Andy Candy would like to share any thoughts, if you want to, Andy, you don't have to. And you don't need to get specific about organisations or anything like that at all. But I'd be curious to see what you've taken out of tonight's session, Andy. Richard Loxton, first of all, thank you.
Okay, yeah. As I explained before, I have been trained in the deception techniques. So way back in 1977, I was deployed in Northern Ireland as a soldier, and I was trained in deception techniques. I subsequently spent most of my working life working in what I now know to be two of the most corrupt industries in the world, which is the British financial services industry and the British aerospace industry. So I have been given all sorts of complete and utter bovine effluent. We've been given privileged access to this information. I said, you can't use it. So I have my own personal experience where I say, yes, I have been directly involved in covering up information. And I know I can't use it in court, so I just have to keep it to myself. So again, I'm just saying it's the expression I use is a bovine effluent sandwich. So the top layer of the sandwich is you're being so polite. Oh, I'm so sorry you feel so unhappy. And yes, we take your complaints so seriously. Then there's the bovine effluent, which is shooting the messenger, which is where I say, how dare you insult us? How dare you say that we haven't done it right? And then the bottom bit of the sandwich is, oh, but of course, if you feel unhappy, you can refer your complaint to somebody else. But then they will play the same game. And you get caught up in this perennial game of pass the parcel, which I personally have been fighting for the last 7 years. I know other people have been fighting it for far longer. Okay.
Thanks, Richard. Thank you very much indeed. I noticed Andy Candy somewhere noisy, so we can't hear from Andy. But we are going to get a comment from Nigel Keynes, and then we'll ask Samuel and Paul to share their final comments, and also Mark Bishop, and then we'll go from there. So, Nigel, just speaking in broad terms, have you encountered any obfuscatory, deceptive correspondence?
Well, I think this is a slightly leading sort of question that you're putting to me here, Andy. And I think what you have in mind is my recent engagement with a particular department at the FCA who've got particularly burnished skills in obfuscation and denial, and have taken these skills to the absolute height. And that is the executive casework unit. And their job is to, if you write to the chairman or the CEO or somebody on the board, it's the job of these guys to say that they're too busy to answer any questions personally, and that's quite a normal situation in large companies, and we do it for them. So they employ people, accomplished people with the particular communication skills to divert and not answer the questions that are being asked. The questions aren't being asked of the particular people that answer the questions. They're being asked of the senior management of the FCA. And so they go to all sorts of lengths and diversions in trying to achieve and just nullify the arguments that are being put to them without in any way answering the straightforward, very often simple and straightforward questions that are being asked of them. And it becomes almost painful after 3 or 4 attempts at asking the same simple question and asking, returning the letters and saying that you haven't replied to this, please can you answer this simple question? And you get alternative, because they've obviously failed to fend you off with the first answers, you get completely different answers. which are equally unrelated to the questions, but they just keep on going like this. And it becomes almost embarrassing, really, the extent to which they go to. But interestingly, today, the FCA have published their answers to the questions that they didn't manage to answer for whatever reason at the public meeting a month or two ago. And of course, I looked at the question, eagerly looked for the question that I asked, and I noticed that the question had been sandwiched between two other vaguely related questions, but not really closely related whatsoever. And the answers don't relate in any way, shape or form to the very specific question that I had asked. And I've actually emailed Andy with the particular comments that I made on that position. And yet again, I'm going to have to go back to them and pursue further those questions. But there must be a point where just flat refusals to answer simple questions can't be answered simply with the response, as they have done in the particular case, answering the written questions here, is to say that we're immune from prosecution, and even if you find that we've done something wrong, we could consent to offer a very modest amount of money and compensation, but that'll be a lot, even if you do succeed.
Yeah, Nigel, thank you so much. I wasn't aware that those.
Anyway, that's the end.
Thank you, Nigel. I wasn't aware those had been published, but I quickly found them online. So, folks, I put into the chat the link to the responses the FCA have put out in relation to the questions at the AGM. Nigel, that's very interesting. I can't wait to see what I shouldn't prejudge, but I can't wait to read what they've said. Nigel, thank you. We're going to go to, first of all, Mark for his final comments, then Sunil, then Paul, and then we'll be wrapping up. It's been a fascinating session. I hope you've all really enjoyed it. Mr. Mark Bishop, anything you'd like to say in your closing of it? Thank you.
Just two things. The first is to reiterate my gratitude to the Truth Unlocked team for the things that they have done kind of privately for us at TTF, which are very much for the benefit of the membership. We can't always talk about these things, but please take Andy's and my word for it that these things are beneficial and may prove to be significant as events play out. Second is, please, treat the service they provide with the respect it deserves. It's not a free service. It's something to be used when you're working with lawyers or insolvency practitioners on a recognised case where there's a budget to buy in professional services. But with those caveats, I think what they're doing is wonderful, and I hope it will help to somewhat reduce the inequality of arms that there exists between us and the financial service industry and its captured regulator.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Powerful words, Mark. Thank you. Mr. Sunil Chadha.
Yes, as I said, I think when I saw what Paul was doing with linguistic analysis, I thought it was a game changer. I think you can all see the drop in public and corporate standards in the United Kingdom in the last probably 3 years. This is one way to challenge it. Please support us, otherwise we won't be around. That's all I can say. It's as simple as that. Thank you. Thank you all for your time and for attending tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Sunil. We're going to go to Paul for his final comments, and then I'd like to just position an idea that Paul and his colleagues might want to think about. Paul, your final words. Thank you.
I'd just like to thank everyone for coming tonight, and hopefully just with those little examples we shared, just give you an insight into the type of work that we've done and that we're doing. And yeah, thank you all for joining today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I like to float a couple of ideas. I haven't given these ideas much thought at all. They might be silly ideas, they might be rubbish ideas, they might be completely useless, but you never know. Within them, there might be some value. what if, Paul, and this is really kind of aimed at you and Sonny really, and you don't need to respond to this idea tonight, just mull it over. What if there was a way for you guys to study, let's say, a response to a complaint where the person who made the complaint is pretty sure the response is riddled with BS of one kind or another and deception? And what if there was a service you provided, which would be paid for? Nobody would expect this to be free. But basically, you look at the communication from the good guy. I'm being very general here. The communication from the good guy to the other party. You look at the response you got back from that other party. You did a kind of litmus test ready reckoner. So you study the question that was asked. You study the response that came back. And you did some kind of Trustpilot grading scheme. Like 5 stars is, you know, what is 2 and 2? It's 4. That gets 5 stars, right? What is 2 and 2? It's 19. That gets 1 star. Something whereby, based purely on the analysis of that question and that response, you form some kind of Trustpilot or Truth Unlocked rating of the likelihood that the respondent provided an answer that was deliberately not answering the actual question. It may not be a lie, but some kind of obfuscation. We could probably find a lot of people who would be happy to pay for that kind of litmus test analysis, because what it can then enable the person to do, let's say it was Nigel Keynes, for example, right? Let's say Nigel got a letter from the FCA or a bank or whatever, and Nigel sends his correspondence to you, and you study it, and you come back with a Truth Unlocked rating of 2 out of 5. Nigel could then go to that party and say, I've had your response analysed by experts on statements, and they have rated your response to me as 2 out of 5. I'm going to be putting this on social media in a couple of weeks' time. Would you like to comment any further? Etc., etc., etc. So I'm talking about small, focused, really specific bits of correspondence where one party wants to challenge the authenticity and the integrity of the response that's been given. We have so much of this, Paul, where we're getting BS thrown back at us, and having something to give us a bit of leverage could be pretty cool. Any thoughts? Any thoughts, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, that sort of thing is certainly something that we could look at as well. I mean, you know, I'm sorry to sort of go back on sort of the murder cases, whatever, but we have to look very objectively at where the analysis takes us and where further questioning is needed. So that the gradients that we'll look in terms of sending back an analysis could range from guilty, someone having guilty knowledge, and there may be further questioning needed, whether they have attendant guilt, so whether there's drugs and alcohol, language of drugs and alcohol, that sort of language filtering in, and something happened to maybe a child or something in their care, or whether they're innocent. We have to be very careful in the way that we grade in terms of something of that severity. So there's absolutely no reason why that can't be applied in exactly the same way in the frames that you're mentioning there.
Could I add something, Andy? Sorry, it was just to say there is I think there is a market out there for a Trustpilot type of solution based on the responses a complainant would get back from a corporate or from a public body.
Or the Financial Ombudsman Service, a corporate entity, anybody who's getting a reply back from an institution or a body that they just know in their heart of hearts is full of BS and wants a little bit of leverage to be able to challenge the integrity of it. Sonny or Paul, Chris, just mull that over. It might or might not lead to something. And the final thing I'll mention is just the idea of crowdfunding. If anybody wants to make use of the services of Truth Unlocked, and you're an ordinary individual who's got some beef with some institution of some kind, and you haven't got the resources to pay for the services, and they're not going to be cheap because these are high quality services. Don't rule out the idea of doing a little bit of crowdfunding. You know, a crowdfunding page that says, something like, I'm looking to raise some money to get some statements analysed by Truth Unlocked. It could really help me because of this, this, and this. I need to raise X pounds. Can you help me, please? The publicity of the crowdfunding could be good leverage for you. B, it might give you some resources to pay for the service, and who knows, it might make a difference. Folks, we're going to bring things to a close here. We're just kicking some ideas around. When we send out the notes tomorrow or the day after, we're probably going to ask everybody for thoughts about use cases. You know, who and what do you know where this kind of service might be useful? I'm ever so keen to try to do all we can, TTF can, to frankly repay the kind free input they've given us over recent months. It's been a bit of a win-win. We've been able to kind of prove to ourselves that that service worked really well. But if we can somehow separate the BS from the truth and use our night vision glasses to good effect, it could be potentially quite transformational. And in some of the issues we're facing, folks, the stakes are so, so high. People having their houses repossessed, people feeling suicidal because they're being shafted by one thing or one entity or another. The stakes are really high in the work that we do, folks, and that's why the work that Truth Unlocked does is really important, and that's why I'm so grateful that so many of you turned up tonight to learn a little bit about it. Paul, Sunil, thank you so much. Mark, thank you so much. Onwards and upwards, folks. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you all for your attendance today. It's much appreciated. Well done, Paul. Good luck, guys. Keep us posted, and if there's anything we can do to help, just shout. We'll do the best we can. Thank you. Good night, all.